In the spring of 1882, a former congressman from Minnesota named Ignatius Donnelly published a book that would detonate across the Western imagination like a depth charge. The book was called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, and its thesis was staggering in scope. Donnelly argued that a great island continent had once existed in the Atlantic Ocean, that it had been the cradle of all human civilization, and that its sudden destruction by a catastrophic flood had scattered its advanced inhabitants to every corner of the globe, seeding the cultures of Egypt, Mexico, Peru, and beyond. The book became a sensation. It was read by prime ministers and schoolteachers alike, and it transformed a 2,000-year-old philosophical parable into something the modern world had never quite seen before, a secular creation myth dressed in the language of science. But here is the strange part. The story Donnelly claimed to rescue from obscurity was never lost. It had been sitting in plain sight for over 2 millennia, in 2 short dialogues written by the Athenian philosopher Plato around 360 BC, and Plato, by every measure of classical scholarship, had invented it. So why, in an age of satellite imaging, deep-sea sonar, and genomic archaeology, does Atlantis refuse to vanish? Why does it keep rising again and again from the depths of cultural memory? The answer has less to do with what lies beneath the ocean and far more to do with what churns beneath the surface of the human mind. To understand Atlantis, you have to start not with maps or ruins, but with a conversation. Plato's dialogues, the Timaeus and the unfinished Critias, are structured as dramatic discussions between Socrates and several companions. In the Timaeus, a character named Critias recounts a story passed down through his family, one allegedly told to his ancestor Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver, by an elderly Egyptian priest during a visit to the temple city of Sais. The priest chastises the Greeks for their short memories and tells Solon of a powerful island nation that existed 9,000 years before their time, situated beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This nation, called Atlantis, was rich, technologically sophisticated, and militarily dominant. It controlled territory across Africa and Europe. And then, in a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, it sank beneath the sea and was gone. In the companion dialogue, the Critias, Plato provides lavish detail. Atlantis was arranged in concentric rings of land and water. Its temples were covered in silver, gold, and a mysterious metal called orichalcum. Its harbors teemed with ships. Its people were descended from the god Poseidon. But despite this divine lineage, they grew corrupt, they abandoned virtue, they turned aggressive, and eventually the gods, led by Zeus, convened to decide their punishment. The Critias breaks off mid-sentence, unfinished, one of the most tantalizing literary cliffhangers in all of antiquity. Now classical scholars have debated Plato's intent for centuries, but the prevailing academic consensus is remarkably clear. Plato was writing a philosophical allegory, not a historical account. Atlantis functions as a moral counterweight to an idealized Athens, a cautionary tale about what happens when a powerful civilization succumbs to hubris, greed, and the lust for empire. The fact that Plato places the story at several removes, told by an Egyptian priest to Solon, passed down through generations, then recounted by Critias, is a rhetorical device, not an evidence chain. It is the ancient equivalent of a friend told me. As the archaeologist Flint Dibble has noted, even the geographic details Plato provides about Athens itself do not match the archaeological record. The entire framework is literary construction. And yet, the desire to believe otherwise has been astonishingly powerful. For roughly 1,500 years after Plato's death, the Atlantis narrative remained a philosophical curiosity, discussed by Neoplatonists and occasionally referenced by early Christian and Jewish writers. But the story changed character during the Age of Exploration. As European ships reached the Americas and the Pacific, colonial powers encountered complex indigenous civilizations. The stepped pyramids of the Maya, the road networks of the Inca, the astronomical sophistication of Mesoamerican calendar systems, that confounded European assumptions about who was capable of building great societies. Rather than credit indigenous peoples with their own achievements, many European thinkers reached for Atlantis. The lost continent became a convenient explanation. Perhaps the ancestors of these primitive peoples had been taught by Atlantean refugees. Charles Etienne Brasseur de Bourbourg, a French priest who studied Mesoamerican texts, connected Maya civilization directly to Atlantis. Augustus Le Plongeon went to the Yucatan in the late 19th century to prove it. Both failed spectacularly, but the template they established, that an advanced, lost civilization must have been the teacher of all others, proved durable. This is where Donnelly enters the picture. His 1882 book took scattered threads of speculation and wove them into a grand, unified theory. Atlantis, Donnelly argued, was not merely real. It was the original homeland of all human achievement. Every great culture, every religion, every technological breakthrough could be traced back to this single drowned source. Donnelly was a gifted writer and a canny political operator, and his book was enormously persuasive. It also happened to be almost entirely wrong, relying on superficial comparisons. Pyramid shapes on different continents, linguistic coincidences that would not survive even the most basic modern scrutiny. But Atlantis, the antediluvian world, did something no previous account had done. It gave the myth the veneer of science, and that veneer proved almost impossible to strip away. The 20th century saw the Atlantis hypothesis fracture into a constellation of competing theories, each claiming to have located the real lost continent. Some placed it in the Mediterranean, linking it to the catastrophic Minoan eruption of Thera, the volcanic explosion around 1600 BC that devastated the island of Santorini and sent tsunamis crashing across the Aegean. The Minoan civilization, centered on Crete, was indeed advanced, maritime, and partially destroyed by natural disaster, and certain broad strokes of its story rhyme with Plato's account, but the timelines are centuries apart from what Plato described. The geography does not align, and there is no evidence that Plato was drawing on Minoan history rather than his own imagination. Others have proposed locations in Spain, off the coast of Cuba, in the Bahamas, where an underwater rock formation known as the Bimini Road briefly excited believers in the late 1960s. And even in Antarctica, in defiance of every known principle of plate tectonics and climate science. More recently, popular attention has turned to the Richat Structure in Mauritania, a striking geological formation in the Western Sahara, also called the Eye of Africa. Seen from satellite imagery, its concentric rings bear a superficial resemblance to Plato's description of Atlantis. But the Richat Structure is a natural geologic dome, roughly 100 million years old, shaped by erosion, not construction. It sits deep in the desert, far from any ocean. Its candidacy as Atlantis relies on ignoring nearly everything geologists understand about the formation while selectively amplifying visual coincidence. Each proposed location follows a recognizable pattern. Isolate a real place with some dramatic feature, match it loosely to Plato's description, dismiss the details that do not fit, and present the result as a breakthrough the establishment refuses to acknowledge. This brings us to a crucial question that archaeologists have increasingly felt compelled to address publicly. Why does the idea that Atlantis was real feel so persuasive to so many people? Surveys conducted in the United States have found that a majority of Americans, roughly 57%, according to a 2018 study, believe that advanced ancient civilizations like Atlantis once existed. That is a remarkable figure, and it points to something deeper than simple gullibility. It suggests a genuine psychological need, a hunger for lost grandeur, for hidden knowledge, for the idea that the past holds secrets more magnificent than anything the present can offer. Psychologists who study conspiratorial thinking note that Atlantis belief often taps into a broader distrust of institutional expertise. If archaeologists say Atlantis is fiction, that becomes evidence, for some, that archaeologists are suppressing the truth. The conspiracy becomes self-reinforcing. As the archaeologist David Anderson, who specializes in Maya studies at Radford University, has observed, the idea that scholars would collectively hide a discovery of that magnitude is absurd. Careers in archaeology are built on overturning accepted knowledge, not protecting it. But the appeal of the hidden truth, the sense of being among the initiated few who know what they do not want you to know, is enormously seductive. There is also a narrative satisfaction to the Atlantis story that real archaeology often cannot provide. Archaeology is, by its nature, painstaking, incremental, and full of ambiguity. A career might be spent analyzing isotopes in pottery shards or cataloging variations in ancient grain storage. These are important discoveries, but they do not satisfy the same imaginative itch as the image of a golden city plunging beneath the waves. Atlantis offers what real history rarely does: a clean story with a dramatic beginning, a tragic end, and a mystery to solve. It is, in a word, cinematic, and cinema, along with television, publishing, and now the internet, has amplified the myth exponentially. From Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Disney animation to the Netflix series Ancient Apocalypse, hosted by the British writer Graham Hancock, the Atlantis narrative has been commercially potent for over a century. Hancock, who has argued for decades that a technologically advanced civilization was wiped out by a comet impact at the end of the last ice age and that its survivors spread around the world to teach other cultures, brought the hypothesis to its largest audience yet. His series was met with sharp criticism from professional archaeologists and scientific organizations. The Society for American Archaeology wrote an open letter urging Netflix to reclassify the show as science fiction. Archaeologists like Flint, Dibble, and David Anderson have spent significant portions of their careers publicly countering these claims, a task they find necessary but sometimes exhausting because the claims keep regenerating. What is worth noting, however, is that the impulse behind Atlantis belief is not entirely baseless. It is merely misdirected. The genuine archaeological record contains discoveries that are in their own right staggering. Göbekli Tepe, the monumental stone complex in southeastern Turkey dating to roughly 9600 BC, was constructed by hunter-gatherers thousands of years before the invention of agriculture or the wheel. Its existence genuinely upended long-standing assumptions about what pre-agricultural societies were capable of. The submerged ruins off the coast of Dwarka in Gujarat, India, have revealed harbor structures and artifacts that connect to ancient traditions about the city of the god Krishna. Across the world, rising sea levels at the end of the last ice age, when global waters rose by roughly 120 meters, drowned vast stretches of previously habitable coastline. It is almost certain that human settlements existed in areas now beneath the sea, and marine archaeology continues to find evidence of these lost communities. In other words, the real story of the human past is more surprising, more complex, and in many ways more humbling than the Atlantis myth allows. The difference is that these real discoveries emerge not from ancient texts reinterpreted through a conspiratorial lens, but from the slow, rigorous, self-correcting work of archaeology. A discipline that has, time and again, shown itself willing to revise its own conclusions when the evidence demands it. Troy was once dismissed as legend until Heinrich Schliemann found it. Pompeii was buried and forgotten for centuries. The Antikythera mechanism, recovered from a Roman-era shipwreck, revealed a sophistication in ancient Greek engineering that stunned scholars. The archaeological record is full of genuine surprises. It simply has no room for a continent-sized civilization that left zero physical evidence. No tools, no pottery, no DNA, no ruins, no agricultural traces, no anything. Anywhere on Earth. And this is perhaps the most important point that often gets lost in the noise. The absence of evidence is not evidence of suppression. It is evidence of absence. A civilization as vast and powerful as the one Plato described, spanning continents and commanding immense resources, would have left a material footprint visible across multiple disciplines: geology, genetics, climatology, marine biology, archaeology. It has left none. Every proposed location for Atlantis has been investigated and found wanting, not because archaeologists lack imagination, but because the physical world does not lie in the ways that stories can. So what do we make of all this? Why does the legend persist? Perhaps the most honest answer is that Atlantis endures because it speaks to something permanent in us. It is not really a story about a lost island. It is a story about loss itself, about the fear that greatness is fragile, that civilizations rise only to fall, that the sea can swallow everything we build. Plato understood this. That was his point all along. Atlantis was not the hero of his tale. It was the warning. A society that forgot virtue, that mistook wealth for wisdom and power for purpose, was a society already drowning long before the waters closed above it. In the 24 centuries since Plato wrote those dialogues, the myth has been reinterpreted, weaponized, romanticized, commercialized, and endlessly debated. It has been used to diminish indigenous achievements and to fuel racist ideologies, as when 19th century theorists and later the Nazis themselves claimed Atlantis as the original Aryan homeland. It has also been used, more benignly, to inspire wonder and to ask real questions about what we do not yet know about the deep human past. The challenge, and it is one every thoughtful person must navigate, is to separate the romance from the evidence, to appreciate the mystery without abandoning reason. The ocean is vast. The past is deep. And there are genuine wonders waiting to be found in both, by those patient enough to look carefully, honestly, and without the need for the answer to be more dramatic than the truth. Because the truth, when you take the time to see it clearly, is dramatic enough. We do not need a lost continent to make the human story extraordinary. We never did. What we need, perhaps, is the willingness to sit with uncertainty, to accept that there are things we do not know without rushing to fill the silence with golden cities and drowned gods. Real discovery does not require conspiracy. It requires curiosity, discipline, and the courage to let the evidence speak, even when it tells us something quieter, stranger, and more magnificent than any legend ever could. Plato gave us Atlantis as a mirror. And the most revealing thing about a mirror is not what it shows you about the world. It is what it shows you about yourself.